Welcome back everybody, I'm Jaran Gabbe, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called The Most Brutal Deaths in Transformers. This was a kids show. Now for new updates and content you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
You watched it every Saturday morning. You knew every Autobot by name, every transformation sound, every battle cry. Transformers was yours. Completely, totally, safely yours. But then 1986 arrived and something changed. You walked into that theater, settled into your seat with your popcorn, and within the first 10 minutes, the show you thought you knew started killing people. Not villain of the week people, your people. The characters you'd grown up with, the ones who showed up every week, who you trusted to be there next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. And the most shocking part isn't what everyone usually talks about when they remember this film. The scene that redefined everything happened so early, so brutally, that most kids didn't even process it was the beginning of the end. Once you understand what they actually put on that screen, you'll never see this franchise the same way again.
Take Ironhide. He's hurt.
But Megatron's getting away!
The comfortable lie. On the surface, Transformers looked like exactly what it was sold as. A half-hour animated commercial dressed up as an adventure series. Autobots fought Decepticons. Nobody really got hurt. The good guys always found a way. Parents sitting in the next room heard the familiar sound effects, the heroic music, the upbeat resolution, and they assumed their kids were perfectly safe. It was robots punching robots. Saturday morning television in the 1980s had an unwritten rule that nobody really challenged. The heroes survive, the lesson lands, and everyone meets again next week. Transformers appeared to honor that contract completely, episode after episode. It was comfort food for your brain before you'd even learned what comfort food was. When the rules stopped applying.
By the skin of our teeth. I didn't know human teeth had skin.
Then came Transformers the movie in the summer of 1986, and that contract was shredded on screen in the first act. This wasn't a special episode with higher stakes. This was a theatrical film with a single unmistakable mission: to clear the board completely. The creative team made a deliberate choice to show the brutal reality of war, depicting beloved characters meeting violent, unambiguous ends in rapid succession. Characters didn't disappear off-screen with some vague implication they'd be back next season. They didn't get conveniently captured and set up for a rescue episode. They were shown going down hard, shot, smoking, their bodies visibly destroyed. For a generation raised on the cartoon's comfortable, predictable rhythms, it landed like a freight train through your Saturday morning refuge.
Hail, Cybertron!
And destruction to all Autobots!
The cut they didn't make. Unlike some other cartoons that were quietly edited for American broadcast or home video, the theatrical version of this film was largely what the filmmakers intended. The deaths were real, on screen, and explicit in their finality. Subsequent television broadcasts occasionally softened minor details, a word of dialogue here, a frame or two there, but the core destruction remained largely intact. The violence wasn't sanitized out of existence. The censorship gap in Transformers the movie wasn't about massive cuts or creative reimagining. It was about what they kept and what they chose to let stand. Nobody warned you before you walked into that theater. Nobody prepared you. You just showed up, and the movie trusted you with something genuinely dark and consequential. The real question, looking back now, is whether that trust was earned, or whether it left a mark that's still there all these decades later.
A gentle robot known as Orion Pax, who was fated to become Optimus Prime.
The moments. Brawn, the character who dropped first. In the TV series, Brawn was the tough guy, the mini-bot who punched above his weight class, literally and figuratively. Kids loved him because he acted like he could take anything, like he was too stubborn or too strong to ever really go down. So when the shuttle attack began in the film's opening sequence, audiences were already processing the chaos of a sudden ambush when Brawn appeared on screen. You recognized him immediately, a familiar face in the middle of all this danger. Then he was shot in the chest. Quickly. Directly. No dramatic final speech. No slow fade to black where he could maybe, possibly recover. A single shot, and one of the most beloved tough guys in the Autobot roster was simply gone. The film moved on to the next moment of crisis without pausing to let you process what had just happened. The speed of it was almost more disturbing than anything else. The show had spent years building the idea that these characters were resilient, powerful, nearly indestructible through sheer force of personality and mechanical design. The movie answered that confidence with a single gunshot. Brawn's death was the first real signal that nobody was safe in this film, that the rules you'd spent years absorbing from Saturday morning cartoons simply didn't apply anymore. You'd spent years believing Brawn could handle anything. One shot changed all of that.
Ask my buddy here about it. And ask him polite, because anyone who doesn't think he's a hero is gonna have to answer to me.
Ratchet, the medic who couldn't save himself. Ratchet was the Autobots' medic, the healer, the character whose entire identity was built around fixing things when they broke. His presence in the cartoon always carried a reassuring undertone. As long as Ratchet was around, things could be made right again. Injuries could be treated. Systems could be repaired. Whatever went wrong, there was a solution, and Ratchet knew what it was. During that same brutal shuttle sequence, Megatron shot him, and the film showed him lifeless and smoking. No dramatic last words from the character who'd spent so many episodes dispensing wisdom and patching up friends. No final act of healing or heroic sacrifice. The character whose entire function was built around saving others didn't make it, and the movie made sure you saw his end clearly. Killing the medic is a storytelling device as old as war narratives themselves. When the healer falls, it signals that no one is coming to fix this. The message was deliberate and coldly effective. The Autobots were being thrust into a world where their support systems had been stripped away in the first act. As you watched the rest of the movie unfold, you carried that knowledge with you. There was no backup, no one to call, no safety net anymore. The team was on its own, and the film wanted you to feel the full weight of that. Years later, watching Saturday morning reruns of the original series, you never quite saw Ratchet the same way. There was always something slightly haunted about those early episodes after you'd seen the movie, a knowledge you carried into scenes that were filmed without any awareness of what was coming. Knowing it as an adult, with adult understanding of what that death meant in narrative terms, gives it a weight that your 8-year-old self couldn't fully process, but absolutely felt in your bones. Starscream, the betrayal that finally landed. If you grew up with Transformers, you spent years watching Starscream scheme, complain, and fail. He was almost a comic villain in the best sense, always plotting, always confident, never actually succeeding. He'd challenge Megatron's authority, scheme for leadership, and somehow always end up thwarted and humiliated. He was reliable in his unreliability. His voice, his ambition, his inevitable failure. It all became part of the comfortable rhythm of the show. You expected him to keep being Starscream forever. The Eternal also ran, the schemer who never quite got there. In one of the film's most darkly satisfying moments, the newly reformatted Galvatron, Megatron reborn and transformed by Unicron, arrived just as Starscream had crowned himself leader of the Decepticons. Starscream had finally won. He was declaring himself the new supreme leader, and then Galvatron appeared. Galvatron blasted him. Starscream disintegrated into dust. His moment of victory lasted seconds. His reign as leader ended before it really began. The character who had spent years avoiding consequences, bouncing from scheme to scheme, finally met them in the most final way possible. It was a reminder that the movie's world had no room for the eternal schemer who always lived to plot another day. As an adult, Starscream's death hits differently because you recognize the dark humor in it. The eternal schemer finally gets what's coming, and it takes about 3 seconds. It's almost Shakespearean in its symmetry.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Prowl, the scene that came out of nowhere. Prowl was a strategist, the logical, level-headed voice in the Autobot ranks, the one who approached problems analytically and methodically. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't the character kids would choose as their favorite, but he was a reliable one. During that same merciless opening sequence, Prowl's number came up. Shot through the chest, his end was depicted with smoke billowing visibly from his body, a graphic and unambiguous image for a children's film. The film didn't slow down. It didn't give you time to grieve. It just moved on to the next character, the next death, the next moment of shock. Prowl's death, bundled together with Brawn, Ratchet, and Ironhide in that opening sequence, contributed to a cumulative shock that was almost impossible to process in real time. 4 major characters in the first act. Multiple deaths stacked so quickly that your brain couldn't quite catch up. These losses functioned less like individual story beats and more like an avalanche. You were still trying to process the first death when the second happened, still processing the second when the third landed, and then there was a fourth. How many of those characters did you actually register as gone during that first viewing? The film moved so fast and piled the deaths up so relentlessly that it's entirely possible you only absorbed the full weight of it later, maybe years later when you watched it again as a teenager or an adult. And suddenly, the whole opening sequence landed differently. That slow burn realization, that delayed understanding of what had been taken from you, is part of what makes this movie genuinely unforgettable.
Bumblebee! Where's Spike?
Spike was captured by the Decepticons.
Optimus Prime, the death that changed everything. Let's be honest about what Optimus Prime meant to a generation of kids. He wasn't just a cartoon character, he was the moral center of the entire Transformers universe. The deep voice, the calm authority, the absolute certainty that right would prevail, even when things looked darkest. Every episode ended with the unspoken promise that Optimus would be there next time, ready to lead, ready to fight, ready to make sure the Autobots came out on top. He was, in every meaningful sense, a constant, the one thing in the show you never had to worry about losing. Transformers the movie took that permanence and slowly, deliberately dismantled it. Optimus Prime battled Megatron, suffered devastating injuries, and then, in front of his assembled Autobots, in front of the entire young audience watching from their theater seats, he died. Not off-screen, not implied, he faded, his color literally draining away as his systems shut down, while the kids watching processed something they had never been asked to process before. This wasn't a reset button, this was goodbye. The decision was deliberate. The filmmakers wanted young audiences to feel the true cost of the war that had been playing out in cartoonish safety for years. They succeeded completely, and arguably too well. Parents reportedly called Hasbro to complain. Children wept in theaters across the country. Kids went home asking their parents if Optimus Prime was actually gone forever. The filmmakers had done something almost unprecedented in children's entertainment. They'd forced kids to sit with genuine grief and given them no comfortable escape route. What hits differently at 40 or 50 than it did at 8? You now understand what the filmmakers were actually doing. They were writing a story about mortality and consequence in a medium that almost never allowed for either. They were using the trust that kids had placed in the cartoon to make something real. You didn't have the vocabulary for it as a kid. You just knew something had been taken from you. Something irreplaceable. That feeling, that specific, confusing grief for a cartoon character, was a completely legitimate emotional response to something genuinely well-crafted. The scene wasn't cruel. It was honest. It was saying, sometimes the good guys lose. Sometimes it's the end. And that honesty is exactly why, 38 years later, you're still thinking about it.
No more, Optimus Prime! Grant me mercy, I beg of you!
What it means now. Understanding what Transformers the movie actually put on screen changes how you read the entire franchise's history. The cartoon had built a world of comfortable permanence, and the film made the deliberate choice to use that comfort as a weapon, to make the shock land harder, precisely because the safety had been so thoroughly established. It takes real craft to build something that feels safe, and then deliberately breach that safety, especially when your audience is children who trusted you completely. The real story isn't about what the censors trimmed or what got smoothed over for broadcast. It's about what they didn't. A movie this dark, aimed directly at children, went out largely as intended. Somewhere in the decision-making chain, someone trusted kids with real grief and real consequence, and the cultural conversation about this film has genuinely never stopped, which tells you that trust mattered in ways nobody quite expected at the time. What the sanitized cartoon version lost, and what the film restored, was stakes. When nothing can ever really go wrong, nothing really matters. The deaths in Transformers the movie mattered enormously, precisely because they were permanent and visible and non-negotiable. They made every subsequent scene in the film carry actual weight. The grief you felt in 1986 was real. Something real happened to you that afternoon. That's not trauma. That's storytelling doing exactly what great storytelling is supposed to do. Transformers the movie was a deliberate, calculated act of narrative courage disguised as a summer cartoon film. It killed your heroes, dismantled your comfort, and asked you, at 8 years old, to sit with loss and keep watching anyway. The occasional edits in broadcast versions barely touched what was really there. The darkness was always in the film. It was always intended, always part of the plan. They tried to give you something real, something that mattered. Most Saturday morning cartoons never had the courage to try. Did that darkness make Transformers better as a story? Did losing Optimus Prime, watching Ratchet fall, and seeing Prowl go down in the first act actually elevate the narrative? Or would you have preferred the safety of one more reset button, one more comfortable return to the status quo? Tell me in the comments which of these moments hit you hardest as a kid, and which one lands differently now that you understand what the filmmakers were actually trying to do.
So that was the most brutal deaths in Transformers. This was a kids show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. To be honest, I absolutely loved the show. The movie was very good, but I wasn't fond of the idea of our favorite characters getting killed off. Especially Optimus Prime. Okay, let's take a look on which characters died. Okay, obviously, as we saw in the first act, it was Brawn, Prowl, Ratchet, and Ironhide. And off screen, we see that Wheeljack and Windcharger also died. No explanation whatsoever. On the Decepticon side, only Starscream died. I mean, look at all our heroes dying and only one. I can understand if they wanted to balance it, but only one? And the whole idea was to get new toys in, to sell new toys. But the filmmakers admitted that they went too far. They think they went too far. I mean, there was this one story, one of the kids locked himself in his room for a week because of the death of Optimus Prime. It just comes to show that what an impact a TV show, especially a movie, can make on young children if they are waiting for their heroes to save the day. But as we know, this is history. The movie is what it is, and we just had to live with it. And season 3 and 4, it was okay. I wasn't very fond of the idea of Rodimus Prime being the leader. If you look at the entire 3rd and 4th season, Rodimus Prime hardly ever has an encounter with Galvatron. It is mostly Ultra Magnus that has the encounters with Galvatron. So, Rodimus Prime is an absolute weak character. But I'm glad that Optimus Prime came back, but it didn't save the series entirely. But, you know, whatever the case may be, Transformers Generation 1 will always have a special place in my heart. Regarding the movie, I absolutely love the soundtrack, and I've got my own copy here as well. And a word of wisdom for today. Don't let trauma and grief overwhelm you. Otherwise, it can destroy you. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.